Pre-registered coordinates. Drone surveillance. No escape route. This wasn't a battle. It was an execution. Somewhere in the southern corridor, a Russian logistics column stretches for nearly 4 kilometers. Armored personnel carriers, fuel bowsers, ammunition trucks stacked with artillery rounds for the peninsula's garrison, T-72 tanks riding low on their flatbeds. The convoy has been moving for 11 hours, grinding south through the kind of darkness that makes commanders feel invisible. They are not invisible. 3,000 meters above the convoy, a Ukrainian reconnaissance drone has been tracking every vehicle for the past 6 hours. Its operators, tucked into a hardened position far from the front, watch thermal signatures bloom on their screens. They count axles. They measure intervals. They note the gaps between vehicles. Too small, far too small for what's coming. The convoy's destination is the peninsula, the only land corridor still considered survivable by Moscow's logistics planners. A route Russian command has used repeatedly because the alternatives are worse. Sea lanes under constant threat, air corridors where Ukrainian air defense waits. This road, this bridge, this crossing point is the southern grouping's lifeline, and Ukraine has known about it for weeks. I'm your host at Conflict East, where we analyze the battles that change wars. Today we're breaking down one of the most precisely executed ambush operations of the entire conflict. A strike that didn't just destroy a convoy, it destroyed a replenishment cycle. It sent a message to every Russian logistics commander in the southern theater. And it showed, once again, that Ukraine doesn't just use weapons. Ukraine invents new ways to fight. The story begins not at the moment of the strike, but weeks before it, in the patient, methodical work of Ukrainian military intelligence. The GUR, Ukraine's Defense Intelligence Directorate, had been watching the southern land corridor for months. Not because they didn't know Russia was using it. They knew exactly how Russia was using it. What they needed was more precise. They needed to understand the rhythm, the timing, the pattern that Russian logistics commanders had settled into because routine feels safe when you've done something 40 times without consequence. What the GUR discovered was a predictable cycle. Approximately every 12 to 15 days, a major reinforcement column would make the crossing. Always at night, always using the same approach roads, always bunching up at the bridge because the structure itself created a natural choke point. Vehicles would slow to single-file crossing pace. The interval between vehicles, which might be 200 meters on open road, would collapse to 20 meters on the span. 20 meters. At that density, a single strike package could engage the entire column simultaneously. Ukrainian special operations teams had also been working the problem from a different angle. Human intelligence assets. The GUR does not publicize their methods, but satellite imagery analysis and OSINT investigations have confirmed the pattern, provided confirmation of the convoy's composition and departure timing. The southern grouping had been requesting ammunition resupply for weeks. The request had finally been approved. A major column was being assembled. Satellite imagery confirmed the vehicle count: 47 primary vehicles, 11 T-72B3 tanks on flatbed transporters, 14 fuel bowsers, each carrying between 15,000 and 20,000 liters of diesel and propellant, 16 ammunition trucks loaded with 152mm artillery rounds, 122mm Grad rockets, and anti-tank guided missiles, 6 armored personnel carriers providing escort, each carrying between 8 and 12 soldiers. The estimated value of the equipment, north of $40 million. The ammunition alone was enough to sustain a Russian artillery grouping for weeks of high-tempo operations. The convoy departed its staging area in the late evening hours, well after civilian traffic had thinned. Russian commanders believed nighttime movement reduced their exposure to Ukrainian air assets. In the early phases of the full-scale conflict, that calculation had some validity. Fixed-wing aircraft and certain missile systems are constrained by weather and visibility. Drones are not. Which weapon was deadlier in this operation? HIMARS precision rockets, long-range artillery, or FPV drone swarms? Comment below with your answer. We'll come back to it at the end. The Ukrainian reconnaissance drone tracking the convoy was a domestically modified long-endurance platform operating at an altitude and standoff distance that made it effectively invisible and inaudible to the column below. Its electro-optical and thermal imaging systems fed a real-time data stream to the targeting cell. Every vehicle was tagged, every position logged. A separate signals intelligence capability was monitoring Russian tactical communications. The convoy's escort vehicles were maintaining radio contact with rear echelon command posts, and those signals, while encrypted, provided timing data through transmission patterns alone. The targeting cell's job at this stage was not to strike. It was to wait. This is where Ukrainian operational planning separated itself from the reactive, opportunistic strike that produces a burning vehicle or two. The standing order from the operations planners was unambiguous. Do not strike until the maximum number of vehicles has committed to the bridge crossing. Do not strike until the column's lead elements are far enough onto the span that reversing is impossible. Do not strike until the trailing elements are close enough that they cannot back away and disperse. The window for that perfect strike package was narrow. Maybe 4 minutes, maybe 6. Depending on how the column paced its crossing, there might be a 90-second window when all 47 vehicles were either on the bridge, queued within 50 meters of the southern approach, or committed to the northern ramp with no room to turn. The strike package had been pre-positioned and pre-briefed 3 days earlier. An M142 HIMARS launcher, operating from a hardened position well outside Russian artillery range, had been assigned the primary strike mission. Its M31 GPS-guided rockets, with a maximum range of 70 kilometers in this configuration, would cover the distance from firing position to target in approximately 90 seconds. A battery of M109 Paladin self-propelled howitzers, provided by a coalition partner, was assigned secondary engagement duties. Their 155 mm rounds pre-registered on the bridge's northern approach road, the queuing area where vehicles would bunch most tightly. A Ukrainian drone unit operating modified long-range FPV platforms, upgraded versions of the domestically produced Vampire system, had also staged 6 vehicles within operational range. These were not the standard $500 FPV drones used in frontline attrition warfare. These were larger, heavier platforms carrying thermobaric warheads optimized for fuel-laden targets. Their operators were experienced, veterans of more than 30 previous strike operations against Russian logistics. Stay with me. What unfolds in the next 18 minutes destroys an entire resupply cycle and sends the Southern Grouping's commanders into a communications panic that Ukrainian signals intelligence will exploit for the next 72 hours. The convoy reached the northern approach to the bridge at 2:17 in the morning. The lead T-72B3 transporter nosed onto the span first. The bridge, a Soviet-era reinforced concrete structure approximately 240 meters in length, groaned under the weight. These structures were not designed for the sustained heavy traffic they had been carrying, and Russian engineers had noted structural concerns in internal reports that, according to intercepted communications, had been waved aside by Logistics Command. The lead vehicle crossed to the midpoint. The second followed. Then the third. The column began to compress as vehicles that had been maintaining distance on the approach road were now forced to close up by the bridge's single-lane width. The targeting cell watched. At 2:23 a.m., the reconnaissance drone operator transmitted a single coded message to the Fire Coordination Center. The entire column was committed. Lead elements had reached the southern ramp. Trailing elements were within 100 meters of the northern approach. Fuel bowsers were on the bridge. The fire coordinator had 3 seconds to make a decision. He made it. The HIMARS launcher crew had been at standby for 4 hours. The M31 rockets were already in the pod. Targeting data uploaded. Coordinates verified twice against the reconnaissance feed. When the fire mission order came through, the launcher operator had the first salvo in the air in under 40 seconds. 6 M31 GPS-guided rockets climbed into the night sky, their exhaust trails invisible at altitude. Each carries a unitary warhead. Not a cluster munition, but a single high-explosive charge of approximately 90 kilograms, designed to penetrate light armor and detonate with a blast radius sufficient to disable vehicles within a 15-meter circle. The M31 travels at supersonic speeds, maneuvering in the terminal phase based on GPS coordinates accurate to within 1 meter. The flight time to the bridge, 87 seconds. The M109 Paladin battery, 6 guns in total, opened fire at 2:23 a.m. and 45 seconds, timed so their 155 mm rounds, with a longer flight time to target, would arrive approximately simultaneously with the HIMARS volley. Each gun fired 4 rounds in the initial salvo. 24 155 mm shells, each weighing approximately 43 kilograms, arcing toward the pre-registered coordinates on the northern approach road. The drone unit launched 4 FPV platforms at 2:24 a.m. Their targets, the fuel bowsers. Specifically, the connection points between cab and tank. Structural weak points where a focused warhead detonation would cause catastrophic secondary ignition. At 2:25 a.m. and 12 seconds, the first HIMARS rocket struck. It hit the third vehicle from the lead, a T-72B3 transporter that had just cleared the southern ramp. The warhead detonated slightly forward of the flatbed's load. The explosion shattered the truck's cab, disabled the engine, and blew both front axles off the frame. The transporter lurched sideways, its flatbed jackkniffing across the road and blocking the exit lane completely. The second rocket struck the bridge itself. mid-span, between the 5th and 6th vehicles. The warhead cratered the roadway surface, blew out 2 concrete guardrails, and the shock transferred through the deck caused the 6th vehicle, a fuel bowser, to veer hard left. The driver, operating on the edge of panic, overcorrected. The bowser struck the right guardrail and stopped at an angle, partially blocking the lane. The 3rd and 4th rockets struck the northern approach queue. The precise coordinates the M109 battery had also targeted. 2 ammunition trucks, stationary and fully loaded, took direct hits within 4 seconds of each other. The first detonation was large. The second, when the 152 rounds cooking off in the truck's cargo bay began to chain react, was enormous. Combat footage captured by the reconnaissance drone and subsequently released by the Ukrainian military shows a fireball rising to approximately 150 meters, illuminating the entire bridge in amber light for nearly 8 seconds. How many vehicles did Ukraine destroy or render combat ineffective in this single fire's window? A 23 vehicles, B-38 vehicles, or C all 47? Answer at the end, and the real number will surprise you. The chain reaction from the second ammunition truck created a pressure wave that traveled down the bridge. Vehicles on the span felt it through their chassis. Drivers who had been frozen by the initial strikes now experienced a physical shockwave. At least 3 vehicle operators lost control of their trucks in the seconds following. On the bridge, the situation had become a sealed killing ground. The 5th HIMARS rocket struck the lead T-72B3 transporter on the southern ramp, the first vehicle to have crossed. Its detonation was smaller in visual terms than the ammunition truck explosions, but tactically more significant, it sealed the southern exit. The transporter's flatbed, now on fire and blocking 2/3 of the road, made forward movement impossible for any vehicle still on the bridge. The 6th rocket struck a command vehicle, ABTR-82A armored personnel carrier riding in the convoy's command section near the center of the column. The hit was not a direct kill. The M31's warhead punched through the vehicle's roof, but the detonation was partially absorbed by the APC's internal structure. The vehicle was disabled. Its communications equipment was destroyed. The convoy had just lost its primary command node. Subscribe to Conflict East if you want to understand how modern warfare actually works, how precision planning, patient intelligence, and integrated fires create outcomes that no individual weapon system could achieve alone. The M109 salvos arrived at 2:25 a.m. and 31 seconds, 19 seconds after the first HIMARS impact. The shells fell along the northern approach road, where the convoy's trailing vehicles were still attempting to reverse. The pre-registered coordinates covered a 400-meter stretch of road. 24 shells impacting in a zone that size, within a 12-second window, is not artillery fire. It is area denial. The trailing vehicles, the remaining ammunition trucks and the rear escort APCs, drove into a rain of steel and high explosive. Intercepted Russian communications from 2:26 a.m. onward paint a picture of complete command collapse. The convoy's primary command vehicle was destroyed. The rear escort commander, in a BTR that had not yet reached the bridge, was attempting to raise the convoy lead on radio and receiving only static and the distant sound of secondary explosions. His transmissions, captured by Ukrainian signals intelligence, became increasingly frantic over 3 minutes before he apparently decided to reverse and abandon the column. He was right to do so, but too slow. The FPV drone platforms, which had been orbiting at low altitude during the initial fires, now dove on their assigned targets. The first platform struck the connection point of the lead fuel bowser, a 20,000-liter vehicle that had been stationary on the bridge's northern section since the initial HIMARS impacts blocked its forward progress. The thermobaric warhead detonated at precisely the angle its operators had calculated. The fuel tank ruptured. The ignition was immediate and total. A burning fuel bowser in the center of a 240-meter bridge is not a tactical inconvenience. It is an inferno that renders the structure impassable and begins a thermal cycle that will stress the bridge's steel reinforcement within minutes. The second FPV platform struck a second bowser 20 meters behind the first. The third and fourth platforms engaged the ammunition trucks still on the northern ramp. Trucks that were stationary because the road ahead was blocked by artillery impacts. By 2:31 a.m., 6 minutes and 43 seconds after the first HIMARS rocket was fired, the bridge was on fire across its full length. The northern approach road was cratered and littered with destroyed vehicles. The southern exit was blocked by burning transporters. The column had ceased to exist as a military formation. What the reconnaissance drone recorded in the following hour was assessed by the Ukrainian General Staff and is consistent with combat footage independently verified by OSINT investigators. 31 vehicles confirmed destroyed by direct hits or catastrophic secondary explosion. 7 additional vehicles confirmed immobilized. Burned out hulks blocking the bridge deck and approaches. 9 vehicles at the rear of the column managed to reverse more than 300 meters before the artillery impacts reached their position. Of these, 4 were subsequently damaged by secondary explosions from nearby ammunition cook-offs. 3 made it back to the staging area in damaged condition, and 2 vehicles of unknown type disappeared from tracking before reaching the staging point. The bridge sustained structural damage. Post-strike satellite imagery, analyzed and published by multiple open-source intelligence organizations, showed cratering of the bridge deck at 3 points, fire damage across the full span, and apparent deformation of at least one support structure near the midpoint. Ukrainian sources estimated the bridge would require at least 3 weeks of repair work before it could carry heavy vehicle traffic again, if Russian engineers could work on it at all under the threat of further strikes. If you believe tactics win wars, and this operation is proof that they do, type Conflict East in the comments. The strategic impact of those 3 weeks cannot be understated in the context of southern logistics flows. The peninsula's garrison had been requesting resupply for weeks before this convoy was assembled. With the convoy destroyed and the primary crossing point unusable, the southern grouping's logistics planners faced a catastrophic shortfall. Alternative routes existed, but they were longer, more exposed, and lacked the capacity to move the volumes the garrison needed. Russian command tried to conceal the scope of the disaster. State media made no mention of the convoy strike. Russian military bloggers, the mill bloggers who often report more honestly than official channels, initially described a partial Ukrainian strike on a supply element. Within 48 hours, however, the scale of the losses had leaked into Telegram channels, and the combination of satellite imagery and the magnitude of the secondary explosions visible on drone footage made concealment impossible. Intercepted communications from the 48 hours following the strike revealed the depth of the crisis. A logistics officer at the southern grouping's rear headquarters transmitted a report captured by Ukrainian signals intelligence. The key passages, according to Ukrainian military intelligence releases, included phrases describing the loss as catastrophic for the replenishment timeline and references to the complete destruction of the scheduled resupply. The officer's superior, responding, apparently ordered a communications blackout on the subject. The blackout lasted less than a day. The crisis was too large to contain. What would NATO have done differently? Should the alliance have pre-positioned additional air defense coverage over this corridor months earlier? Comment your tactical analysis below. Let's look at the Russian side of this, because understanding their failures matters as much as cataloging Ukrainian successes. The convoy's commanders made several decisions that, individually, might have been defensible. Together, they were fatal. First, the timing. Night movement was supposed to reduce Ukrainian observation capability, but the routine had become predictable. This crossing route had been used so often that Ukrainian intelligence had built a detailed pattern-of-life analysis. The night movement schedule didn't protect the column. It just confirmed which night the column would move, because the pattern was consistent enough to predict. Second, the spacing. On the approach roads, vehicles maintained reasonable intervals. On the bridge, the structure's single-lane configuration compressed the column to a density that made a multi-vehicle strike almost unavoidable. Russian logistics planners had apparently discussed crossing vehicles in smaller groups with longer intervals. Intercepted communications suggest this option was raised and rejected because it would increase the convoy's overall crossing time and, in their assessment, extend the exposure window. The calculation was backwards. A smaller group takes longer to cross the bridge, yes, but it also means a single fire's window destroys fewer vehicles. Third, the electronic warfare gap. Russian forces had access to vehicle-mounted electronic warfare systems that could, in theory, have detected and potentially disrupted the reconnaissance drone tracking the column. But OSINT analysis of the convoy composition shows no dedicated electronic warfare vehicle was included. The assumption, apparently, was that nighttime movement provided sufficient protection. There was one moment when the operation nearly failed entirely. Approximately 90 minutes before the convoy reached the bridge, the Ukrainian reconnaissance drone experienced a partial systems fault, a communications link interruption that lasted approximately 7 minutes. During those 7 minutes, the targeting cell lost real-time visual on the column. The drone's operators, working quickly and with the kind of calm that comes from training, executed a manual reconnection protocol that restored the link before the column had moved significantly from its last known position. 7 minutes. With heavier Russian electronic warfare presence, a longer fault duration, or a less experienced drone crew. Those 7 minutes could have meant losing track of the column, losing the timing window, and watching 47 vehicles cross the bridge and disperse before the strike package could be triggered. The drone crew's professionalism, in that 7-minute window, mattered as much as the missiles. But the story doesn't end with the strike. What happened in the 72 hours that followed showed another dimension of Ukrainian operational thinking. The signals intelligence team monitoring Russian tactical communications during the Convoy operation continued to monitor those frequencies after the strike. And what they found was a second-order intelligence windfall. The chaos following the convoy's destruction caused Russian commanders to break communications discipline. In the scramble to assess losses, report up the chain of command, and coordinate emergency logistics alternatives, commanders and staff officers transmitted on frequencies and in formats that gave Ukrainian analysts a detailed picture of the southern grouping's actual supply state. Requests for emergency ammunition resupply revealed stockpile levels at specific locations. Queries about alternative crossing routes revealed which bridges Russian command considered viable, and, by implication, which bridges were highest priority for future Ukrainian interdiction operations. The GUR spent the following 72 hours cataloging this intelligence. Multiple subsequent operations, which Conflict East will cover in upcoming analyses, were seeded by intelligence obtained in those 72 hours of Russian communications panic. This is the compounding effect of a successful ambush. The immediate tactical outcome is the destruction of 47 vehicles. The second-order outcome is the intelligence harvest from the enemy's post-strike confusion. The third-order outcome is the operational disruption that flows from what that intelligence reveals. Ukraine understood all three levels. Russian command did not, apparently, understand that their post-strike communications were as operationally significant as the convoy itself. Have you ever seen a military operation where the aftermath created more strategic value than the strike itself? Comment your thoughts. We read every response. The battle damage assessment, compiled by Ukrainian military intelligence and cross-referenced by independent analysts using satellite imagery and combat footage, settled on the following figures: 38 vehicles confirmed, destroyed, or rendered permanently non-mission capable. This included all 11 T, 7 2B3 transporters and the tanks they carried, 9 of the 14 fuel Bowsers, all 16 ammunition trucks, and 2 of the 6 escort APCs. Of the remaining vehicles, 3 APCs and 5 support vehicles were damaged but mobile and evacuated to Russian-controlled territory. 1 APC and 1 support vehicle were captured intact when their crews abandoned them on the approach road. The captured vehicles provided additional intelligence. Ukrainian technical intelligence teams examined the abandoned APC within hours of the strike and found operational orders, maps annotated with unit positions, and communications equipment that, even in damaged condition, provided technical data of value to Ukrainian electronic warfare specialists. The human cost. Ukrainian sources estimate between 85 and 120 Russian personnel killed or wounded in the strike and its immediate aftermath. The precision of that estimate is limited, because Russian command did not report the losses accurately, even internally, according to intercepted communications. The rear logistics commander who had transmitted the catastrophic loss assessment was subsequently relieved of his position, according to Ukrainian military intelligence sources. A common Russian response to bad news, which only further incentivized commanders to underreport losses. Now zoom out. What did this operation teach both sides? What does it mean for the broader conflict? For Ukraine, the operation confirmed and refined several doctrinal insights. The decision to wait for the maximum number of vehicles to commit to the choke point rather than striking early for a partial success was validated completely. An early strike might have destroyed 5 or 8 vehicles. The patient strike destroyed 38. The difference is not just tactical. It is the difference between damaging an adversary's logistics and collapsing a replenishment cycle. The integration of multiple strike systems. HIMARS for precision engagement of specific high-value vehicles, M109 artillery for area denial of the approach roads, FPV platforms for fuel-specific targeting, showed combined arms proficiency that Ukrainian forces have developed through 2 years of high-intensity combat against a numerically superior enemy. No individual system would have achieved this outcome alone. The HIMARS could destroy specific vehicles but could not cover the entire approach zone. The artillery could saturate the approach zone, but could not guarantee precision hits on bridge infrastructure. The FPV platforms could engage fuel targets with optimal warhead selection, but could not survive without the suppression effect of the missile and artillery fires. Together, they created an effect greater than the sum of their parts. For Russia, the lessons are harder and, based on available evidence, not yet fully absorbed. The predictability of logistics patterns remains a fundamental vulnerability. Russian logistics doctrine, built for a different era of warfare, assumes that nighttime movement and electronic emission control provide sufficient protection. Against a peer adversary with long-endurance drone surveillance, GPS-guided precision munitions, and patient intelligence collection, those assumptions are not just wrong, they are dangerous. Every time a Russian logistics column follows a predictable pattern, it is signing a death warrant that Ukraine will eventually execute. The absence of dedicated electronic warfare coverage for major logistics columns is a capability gap that has been exploited repeatedly. Russian forces have electronic warfare assets. Why those assets are not routinely assigned to protect high-value logistics movements is a question Russian military planners should be asking. And, according to OSINT analysis of subsequent convoy movements, have not yet fully answered. Real tactics, real consequences. Conflict East. The bridge itself, and its role as a choke point, points to the broader strategic geometry of the southern theater. When a logistics network is compressed into a small number of viable crossing points, those crossing points become existential vulnerabilities. Protecting them requires either overwhelming air defense coverage, which Russia has not maintained consistently, or accepting that the enemy will eventually find the window. Ukraine has shown, repeatedly, that it will find the window. There is a larger lesson that extends beyond the tactical and operational. The operation described here required weeks of patient intelligence collection, careful operational planning, precise fire coordination, and the professional excellence of drone operators, HIMARS crews, artillery battery commanders, and signals intelligence teams working in concert. None of those capabilities existed in Ukraine's military at the level required for this kind of operation before the full-scale phase of the conflict began. They were built in combat, under fire, against a much larger and better resourced enemy. That is perhaps the most significant lesson of all. Ukraine did not just hold the line. Ukraine learned faster than its adversary. Now, the answer to our tactical quiz. The question was, how many vehicles did Ukraine destroy or render permanently non-mission capable? The options were A-23, B-38, or C, all 47. The answer is B, 38 vehicles. Not all 47, because 9 vehicles at the rear managed to withdraw before the full weight of the artillery strikes reached their position. But not merely 23, because the secondary explosions from ammunition trucks and fuel bowsers destroyed additional vehicles that were not directly targeted by any missile or shell. The chain reaction from the ammunition cook-offs accounted for at least 7 vehicles that were not in the primary target set. The 38 figure includes one detail worth noting. All 16 ammunition trucks were destroyed. Every single one. The replenishment mission, the reason the convoy existed, failed completely. Even if the remaining 9 vehicles had carried significant supplies, they carried none of the artillery ammunition that was the convoy's primary cargo. The southern grouping's artillery shortage was not relieved by this convoy. It was made worse, because the failed resupply attempt had consumed logistics resources, fuel, vehicle wear, personnel, that would now have to be replaced before another attempt could be made. And the bridge was down. Which means the next attempt, whenever it came, would have to find a different route. Was Ukraine's decision to wait for the full column to commit to the bridge the right tactical choice, even knowing that a faster strike might have been more survivable for the strike package? Could Russian command have prevented this outcome with better logistics doctrine? Or was the southern corridor's geography so constraining that the choke point was always going to be exploited? And what would you have done differently, as either the Ukrainian targeting cell or the Russian convoy commander? If you had known what was coming, drop your tactical analysis in the comments. Team Conflict East reads every one. Subscribe to Conflict East, because we break down the battles that textbooks will study for decades. Because the lessons of modern warfare are being written right now, in real time, by the soldiers and operators and intelligence analysts fighting this conflict with a sophistication and intensity that no previous generation has faced. We want you to understand what they're doing and why it matters. The bridge is quiet now. The wreckage has cooled. But the burned hulks of 38 vehicles remain, some on the span, some on the approaches, some scattered by the force of secondary explosions across several hundred meters. The water below reflects the sky, silent reminders that modern warfare punishes tactical mistakes without mercy. That patience is a weapon. That precision is a force multiplier. And that when Ukraine says it will destroy your convoy, it means it. Stay vigilant.